So I recently got myself the new title in the God of War series, and after finishing it, I have to say, I am not disappointed. After playing Ragnarok's predecessor, God of War 2018, I heavily anticipated the new release. I found the game to be glorious, not only because the gameplay itself is brilliant, but also because of the extremely well-crafted story it wanted to tell. It was a story about a father, Kratos, the previous Greek god of war, and his son Atreus, bonding together during their journey to the highest peaks in all the 9 realms. That game left me simply amazed and got me excited for the future. And, well, the future is here with the appearance of God of War Ragnarok. And did it meet my expectations? Was I disappointed? In this review, I'm going to be going over what I really liked and what I didn't like so much about the game. There will be spoilers, heavy spoilers, so only watch this video if you either don't care about being spoiled or have already played the game in full. Okay, let's get into it. In understanding what Ragnarok did so well, we need to compare this game to its predecessor. I'd like to say that God of War 2018 was a near flawless title, but I must say, Ragnarok actually improved on everything 2018 did both well and poorly. First thing to highlight, of course, is the added enemy variety in Ragnarok. The core issue I had with 2018 was the lack of enemy variety. Sure, there were a lot of cool finishers, but after you got past a few of the areas, you started to realize that the main enemies you'd be fighting were either Draugr, Hellwalkers, Nightmares, and Dark Elves. That's basically it. In terms of boss variety, you'd be either fighting Trolls or Ancients. Yeah, that's not much variety for a game aiming to pace its story on combat. When I first started playing Ragnarok, the first thing I really wanted to see was some actual enemy variety, and boy, was I not disappointed when I got just that. You do occasionally see some of the old enemies and bosses return, but the developers truly learned their lesson when it came to the sheer variety of enemies placed in front of you. This lesson was shown to you quite literally when you first enter the Jarnsmida pit mines. When you crash land into these mines, you're met with your first troll. The funniest thing is the fact that Kratos just decided to decapitate him outright, because I'm sure he was as annoyed as we were about the amount of trolls in 2018. That was the developers telling us not to worry about an overuse of bosses, and they were right. There were a lot of bosses, all very fun to fight and equally challenging to face. My favorite of the bosses were actually the Berserkers, and while some saw them as a downgrade from the Valkyries, I think they were still quite fun to fight. You had to try your best to dodge their attacks while still trying to get your own hits in at the same time. Parrying their attacks with your shield never stopped being satisfying, and when you managed to defeat them, it truly felt like you overcame something fierce. Though it is important to stress the fact that the enjoyment I felt from fighting the bosses mainly came from the improved skill tree. The skill tree was relatively the same as 2018, but with a few added bonuses which were greatly appreciated. You had your standard skill trees for your Leviathan Axe, Blades of Chaos, and Atreus, all practically the same as in 2018. With the addition of a new weapon, the Draupnir Spear, you had an entirely new skill tree to conquer, albeit it meant the removal of 2018's shield/fist skill tree. Also, the fact he could now play as Atreus, I'll get more into that later, meant that his skill tree was now recontextualized from being solely companion based to focusing on actual combat, with Freya being a new companion for Kratos. Something that was unexpected, but pretty cool to see by the way. She had her own skill tree for the player to conquer. And on top of that, every single skill tree had the added benefit of being able to enhance specific skills by adding damage, stun, or element tokens after using said skill enough times. Also, Rage itself is split into 3 different components, to which you can upgrade with XP if you so wished. If you take all these things into account, you can clearly see the improved nuances made to 2018's combat system. And this isn't even to mention the fact that there's the added mechanic of the Amulet of Yggdrasil, which further complicates in a good way the combat of Ragnarok. This made the leveling up Kratos feel very satisfying, especially because of the fact that if you take the time to learn how each mechanic works and you choose to upgrade your gear and use your XP, Kratos can become extremely OP by the end of the game. There were also other smaller improvements, like the improved graphics and the fact that Kratos no longer unnecessarily drops down the chain after you unlock a shortcut. Probably the most noticeable improvement is the improvement of the quality and quantity of side content available to the player. 2018 side content was already impeccable, and so to say that Ragnarök improved on it is not something to gawk at. Really quickly, the best thing about the side content in Ragnarök was the fact that if you completed a side quest, you actually impact how the region itself looks. So for example, if you were able to complete one of the first side quests in the game, where Mimir asks you to free the Lingbacker, I don't know how to say it, the Lingbacker. Anyway, you actually get to see the creature remain in the lake for the entire rest of the game. Further, if you decide to free the first of the Hafgufa in Alfheim, you get to witness it flying in the skies above. If you free the second Hafgufa, you watch them give birth to millions of their babies, to which they now roam free in the skies. It's really impressive how important these side quests feel. Not only do you get to see the impact of completing these side quests, but you also get a deeper look into the character of Kratos. This is also true with the completely optional side areas within the game. The most notable of these areas being the crater in Vanaheim. This is an entire DLC's worth of content, with several complete stories and a lot of side quests to complete. The region is distinct in its design and contextualizes Thor's history ever so slightly. It was a true open world experience, and probably my favorite area in the game. Now with that all said, I guess I should now talk about the story a little bit, since, you know, it's probably the most important part of Ragnarök. In particular, I recall there being some debate about how Odin and Thor were depicted before the game was released. Thor's design was especially critiqued for not fitting Marvel's interpretation of a Norse god, and I have to say, I much prefer the way Thor is designed in Ragnarök. His design is much less focused on giving him muscle, and is instead preoccupied on making him look actually menacing. Thor looks like a guy that doesn't care. He just wants to mess some people up for some fun. Odin, on the other hand, is the polar opposite to Thor, with him having little to no muscles and his clothing being designed to give him an illusion of a menacing figure. At first I wasn't so sure on Odin's design and thought it was a bit odd, but as I got to see him more in action and I saw him more in cutscenes, I started to get used to it. Now, after finishing the game, his design just makes sense for the story. As an example, it makes sense why his clothing is exaggerated on the broadness of his shoulders, as it fits his character as a master manipulator. When Atreus first goes to Asgard, he doesn't seem to be such the scoundrel that Freya, Mimir and Tyr, even though Tyr was just Odin in disguise, described him to be. We as the players, much like Atreus, are shown this contrast between who Odin wants to be represented as and how others see him as truly being. All these illusions and attempts at manipulation come crashing down in the finale of the game, which is as satisfying as a conclusion as it could have ever been. This conclusion came in the form of Ragnarök itself. After blowing Gjallarhorn, Kratos manages to open a way to Asgard, to which all the realms unite in taking down Odin and the Norse pantheon. This was a pretty cool segment, though I can't help but wonder if the entire event happened a bit too quickly. Maybe it's just me, but while the walk to Odin was definitely cool, with you seeing Thor fighting Jormungandr in the distance, the entire epic scale of the conflict kind of sizzled away once you made your way through the wall. Jormungandr blips away in what is seemingly a random event. Yes, this was meant to happen at some point, but I'm surprised an entire cutscene wasn't dedicated to the disappearance of Jormungandr. What's more is the fact that the entire final fight, first against Thor and then finally against Odin, takes place in the exact same place. You don't get knocked about throughout the realm like you did in 2018's final fight, and there are no huge spectacles of flying about on a dragon or a giant being summoned to put an end to the fight. It's just a very simple fight between Kratos and Thor, and then another very similar fight against Odin. It wasn't underwhelming, but I guess I expected a bit more than what we actually got. For this game being the end of the Norse saga, I'd like to have seen something on a grand scale, but I suppose it ultimately makes sense since Odin, in this interpretation, was never meant to be grand in his use of power. Because of that, I still like the final fight we got, and I feel it does. Although it is disappointing, it does fit the representation of Odin we were ultimately given. Though, while Kratos' ability to defy fate was definitely a reason to celebrate, the game couldn't help but leave us with a very bittersweet ending. See, Brock realized that Tyr was actually Odin in disguise, and in his efforts to confront Odin, was ultimately killed by him. This plot twist blew my mind, and on rewatching earlier scenes between the fake Tyr and the rest of the crew, it's insane how well they were able to foreshadow this twist while still keeping it under the radar for new players. Not only does this fake Tyr accidentally call Freya Frigg when first meeting her, but you can very clearly see fake Tyr trying to deter the crew from pursuing a war with Asgard. Nonetheless, Brock did ultimately piece things together, ultimately leading to his demise. Brock's death was devastating, as he was actually one of my favourite characters in the game, and so his death in Ragnarök proved to leave an impact. Not only because of the fact he was truly dead, but also because of Sindri's transformation as a result of his death. I think it truly spoke as to how broken Sindri had become through the simple choice to show Sindri no longer wearing his gloves. Sindri is now a broken man, having lost everything because of his willingness to give away. Embodied in Brock's riddle, what gets bigger the more you take away from it, Sindri's fall is poetically reflected. Mimir's realization to what the answer is, a whole, added to the bittersweet nature of Ragnarok's ending. Yes, Kratos and Atreus have finally come to terms with their relationship, and yes, Odin and Asgard have been destroyed, but to what cost? I frankly don't care if this is the last God of War game, since this game ended on such a perfect note, especially with the funeral scene, where we send Brock off once and for all, and we see everyone grouped together, albeit Atreus is with Angerboda on an adventure, but we see everyone together mourning the loss of their friend. Now that I've laid out all the amazing and all the good, it's time we look at perhaps the only big issue with the game. Remember, when I say big issue, that isn't really saying much. When it comes to a game of this stature, a big issue isn't actually that bad, since all the good highly outweigh the bad. But even saying bad, like bad, it's an overstatement. The one key issue with the game is the fact that when you're trying to solve some of the game's puzzles, your companions can't help but reveal the answers to you as soon as you enter the puzzle room. This first became a prominent issue when at the start of the game, Kratos and the crew enter Svartalfheim. Is that right? That's I'm pronouncing it right. In Svartalfheim, as you move along your boat and you decide to beach on one of the small plots of land available in the wetlands, you come across your first puzzle. This puzzle is fairly simple. There is a geyser blocking your way and you need to get rid of it in order to progress. Now, since we're new to the game, you probably take a few minutes to realize that you need to freeze the base of the geyser. Finding out this was the case would have been satisfying, if not for the fact your companion told you this exact solution about 5 seconds after you finished the fight that preceded it. Elsewhere, along the same path in the wetlands, you come across another similar puzzle, except this time, you need to freeze a geyser such that another geyser would become stronger, thereby opening the path. Again, you have zero time to survey the area, and just as you're trying to understand the layout to the puzzle and getting ready to solve it yourself, your companion decides it'd be a great idea to ruin the puzzle by directly giving you the answer. This happens throughout the entire game. Despite how annoying this issue had been at times, I need to point out what exactly made this issue such a glaring one. Specifically, I recall the fact that your companions, for whatever reason, only spoil some of the puzzles you encounter on your journey. What makes this even more confusing is the fact that most of the puzzles spoiled by your companions are the easier puzzles, with the harder puzzles being given no hints whatsoever. I wouldn't have been too annoyed by this if the companions were consistent in whether they would give a hint to the puzzle or not. But it was the sheer fact that each time you encountered a new puzzle, you simply did not know if it would be spoiled on the outset or if you would be left to your own devices. Now, I would like to reiterate the fact that this wasn't a big enough issue to lessen my enjoyment of the game, but it is clear that there are still things to be improved on. I'm surprised, given the amount of accessibility options, that this issue had not been solved through the implementation of a simple toggle setting, with the setting dictating to your companions whether or not to give you hints. Just a simple yes/no. So, all in all, it's pretty impressive that this, what would be otherwise understood as a minor issue, is the biggest issue for this game. Besides the hint system being a tad rough around the edges, I think it's worth quickly pointing out some of the other nitpicks I have for this game. First, probably the most apparent nitpick, is the clipping that I noticed at some points in the game. This is especially noticeable in the Ironwood portion of the game, specifically when you as Atreus or Loki and Angerboda pick up these rocks to move to the next area. What I noticed was the fact that these rocks clipped into the terrain, making an otherwise realistic style feel less so. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about it, since that was only a simple nitpick. It's only something I noticed. Another nitpick is the fact that while solving some of the puzzles, you'd have to question why Kratos didn't walk around the obstacle blocking your path, or in some cases, stepped up on some of the elevated terrain to get a chest just out of reach. The biggest offender in this regard was during the side quest involving saving the second half Gufa. During your journey to save the creature, there was a small elevated piece of rock, to which was blocking you from opening a chest. You had to solve this relatively intricate puzzle that wasn't ruined by the hint system, thankfully, but you couldn't help wonder why Kratos, the retired god of war, didn't just walk around the obstacle in the first place. I suppose one of the defenses for this is that he simply wanted to teach Atreus how to solve big puzzles, but you can play the segment with Freya, so that defense doesn't work. I suppose also, when playing such an overpowered character, you'd simply need to get over it, since if Kratos was as powerful in gameplay as he was in cutscenes, everything would bore the player. But yeah, that was another simple nitpick, nothing crazy, and to be honest, I only really added the section since there's truly nothing else to criticize the game for extensively. It's amazing how polished this game is, and while these nitpicks are present, the game is still very beautifully made. God of War Ragnarök is an amazing game. A near masterpiece, if you will. It exceeds in every single department and surpassed my expectations tenfold. If you compared it to its predecessor, this game improved on every single mechanic introduced in the prior game, while also introducing new key mechanics and new weapons. The Draupnir Spear is a welcome addition to the game, matching the Blades of Chaos and Leviathan Axe in terms of how fun and how iconic they are in gameplay. The new and improved skill tree is wonderful, and the fact that you can play as both Kratos and Atreus was amazing to discover. The story is nothing to scoff at, building upon the story beats of the last game, while also leaving the player fascinated with how the climax of the game, Ragnarök itself, came to fruition. I cannot wait for what the next game is going to hold, and frankly, I'd be happy if they just ended the series with this game. The ending was perfect, both in terms of completing Kratos' transformation into a respectable father, as well as Atreus finding his purpose. The ending had also been bittersweet, with the destruction of Asgard meaning the death of Odin, but also the death of Brock, leaving Sindri to question whether victory was worth giving everything away. If you complete the funeral side quest at the end of the game, the player is left with Mimir's answer to Brock's riddle, recontextualizing everything that came to pass throughout the story. It's simply a near masterpiece, and for that reason, I'm going to give God of War Ragnarök a 9.2 out of 10. It is so close to being perfect, and I truly hope if there's a next game that the next installment in this series would further top my expectations, much like how this game did for 2018. That's all for this review. I hope you enjoyed watching it as I did making this video. Remember to check out my other content if you have the time. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you any other time. Good job, Santa Monica. You